My name is Pete Winnestor. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the chairman for the town of Rock. And in regards to tonight's meeting, informational meeting, if we could just all please stand, remove cover, and salute our flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Just a small caveat for tonight. Tonight's meeting is an informational session in regards to the conditional use permit application submitted by Frac Sand LLC on August 13th. This is an outstanding opportunity for the residents to hear from experts in regards to questions and concerns that we may have. We truly should feel honored that the collection of experts are available to us this evening. I will let them introduce themselves as well as their area of expertise. Once all panel members have completed their presentations, we'll open to questions from the floor. Please keep all questions short and to the point. We may limit the time frame of this meeting in respect to those that have traveled a distance to attend. But we will let it go for as long as we truly feel that we need to. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to first speaker. I know that we've got a number of speakers tonight. We do have Roberta Walls, John Dussman, Shane Wooker-Fenning could not make it. He had a prior commitment. Tracy Arnold and Roland Hawk. So we do have the four panel members, and once again at that point, I will turn it over to our first speaker. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Roberta Walls. I am the mining coordinator for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Those who may have heard my name before might recognize me as having been kind of the frac sand guru, if you will. So my role has kind of expanded to include all of mining as of late. And so I am here to talk with you about the Department of Natural Resources regulatory authorities for industrial sand mining. I have given talks to large groups of people about this type of thing before, and it's been a few years since I've done this, so I've had to dust off my presentation because a number of changes have occurred within the legislation recently that affects our authorities. So, John, are you going to run the controls for me?
You bet I will.
All right, so just some bit of factoids for you. Non-metallic mining has been in Wisconsin for well over 100 years. It's one of the more numerous resources that the department has, or that the state has, and encompasses roughly about 3,000 non-metallic mines in the state of Wisconsin. That's updated as we are learning more about all of the different types of mines that we have. We're adding to that number to get a collective number all across the board. So that type of mining, non-metallic mining, includes limestone, granite, shale, trap rock, and sand. And sand can be used for many different things. As you can see the list up there, anything from farmers using it for animal bedding, building materials, cranberry operations. I had the privilege of following around a cranberry operation, and they will apply sand to the beds of the cranberries in the middle of the winter to help promote the growth of the cranberry vines. Foundry sand, glass, and the proppants that you see there are what we term as industrial sand. Transportation uses it for building roads as well. Okay, here's a little pop quiz for you. Can you take a look at the two pictures and tell me which one you think might be the sand mine? Now, no need to raise hands or speak out, but I'll give you a little bit of a cue. It's a little bit not what you would have expected. Go ahead and hit the John and reveal for us. It's the one on the right. And the reason being is that the one on the right is just simply what industry members have called a hog and haul or dig and haul type operation, where all they're doing is blasting, scooping, maybe crushing at the most for processing, and then hauling it off to be processed elsewhere. The one on the right, believe it or not, is a limestone quarry. They have the full-scale operations. They run a high-capacity well. They wash their limestone for clean rock purposes, and when they clean out their ponds, The pile that you see there is an example of what they will then turn around and sell to farmers as a field amendment known as ag line. Specifics on industrial sand mining. These are the last numbers that the DNR has as of 2016. A grand total of 128 industrial sand mine facilities. We consider 92 of them to be active. And by that we don't mean actively producing sand, but actively in existing mine. Inactive sites at 32 is what we call those who have gotten permits and have not yet broken ground, or are still in the process of obtaining permits. We have roughly 4 sites that are confirmed reclamation. That means they're all done mining. The land has been reclaimed for use post-mining. These are all of the different areas that the department has regulatory authorities in. Air quality, high-capacity wells and groundwater use, public drinking water supplies, borehole abandonment, stormwater, water regulation and resources. Reclamation, I'm going to get into a little bit of detail towards the end, but that is actually regulated at the county level, but DNR has oversight on it, and I'll explain that towards the end. And then I will also go through the department's authorities where enforcement are concerned. Before I jump into each of those categories to give you more specific detail, I'd like for you to know that there are areas of non-metallic mining that DNR does not have regulatory authorities for. Things like noise, light pollution, and blasting are not under the DNR's authorities. Oftentimes you will find local authorities, your town, your county, have some regulation or some ordinances that address noise or light pollution. Blasting is regulated under the Department of Safety and Professional Services. For those of you who are in my age category, that was formerly known as Commerce, but has now since graduated to a brand new agency called DSPS for short. Zoning and land use is also something that's not in the department's authorities. We kind of touch a little bit on that with shoreline zoning, which is something that I'll include in my discussion about reclamation. But again, it's not something that we directly regulate. That's done at the local level. You'll also see that safety at mine sites is not regulated by the department. There is some oversight with the DSPS, but for the most part, it's a federally regulated process. So the Mine Safety and Health Association does safety for employees on the mines at the mine sites, but then OSHA will also have a play when processing facilities are involved. Okay. All right, so a little bit about DNR staff resources. So from a regulatory standpoint of view, we have a couple of air program staff that oversee compliance at some of our companies, and we have roughly 1.6 full-time staff members dedicated to the water compliance side of things. They are not the only ones that are involved with industrial sand mining regulation. Those are the ones that you will see probably in the field, encounter them, have discussions with them out on the property itself. But there's a lot of supporting staff in the department that gives them additional information and work duties. So we will have intake specialists for permit applications who will screen them and look for information that's missing. We will have engineers that will be working on drafting permits. We have the water quality biologists that will provide us information about the resources that are near the area. We will also have air quality specialists and engineers that can talk to us about what the air quality requires that goes into the permit processes. So you can see that there's any number of people that are involved with it. At any one given time, we could have up to 30 people that touch a regulated facility. We also have other staff that contribute. We would be remiss to not recognize the county staff members because they are also involved in the reclamation and the shoreline zoning aspects of it. We keep very close communications with our county staff and recognize their efforts as well. They help us keep eyes and ears on the site as well. Okay, I'm going to get a quick drink here. I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about the air program and the air quality requirements. From a permitting perspective, the air program issues two different kinds of permits. One is a construction permit and the other is an operations permit. Construction permits are there to allow a facility to construct the equipment that they need in order to operate. Once the department has verified that the equipment was constructed according to design and specifications, then they transfer over into an operations permit. The construction permit will also take a look at any modifications to equipment. So a lot of times you might see an existing mine go for public notice with regards to having a modification to an operation. Dust control plans are covered by the air permit program as well. And a waiver does exist for constructing a mine where they want to just break ground and shape the lay of the land while they're getting approvals for the equipment. I know that particulate matter has been a big topic of discussion with industrial sand mines. So a little bit about particulate matter. This is just a scale reference for you. This would be the typical human hair looked at underneath a microscope. And that average is about 70 microns in diameter. The average human hair is. Some are thicker, some are thinner. I know mine's really thin. So when you take a look at that, sand particles are generally larger than that. They're usually coming in at around 90 microns in diameter. Some are even larger than that. A lot of times the sieve sizes will be even larger still. But a lot of people are focused in on the 2.5. And as you can see, each one of these little bubbles represents 10 microns across. 2.5, you can see, is incredibly smaller still. So if the sand is itself is quite large, then what does the department look at with regards to particulate matter? The department looks at PM10 size. That's the particle size that is known to be considered respirable particulate. Okay, that's what can get past your body's defense systems and get down into your lungs. When we ask for folks to monitor for PM10, we're really asking them to monitor for PM10, PM4, PM2.5. It's all included when we ask for that monitoring of PM10. See next slide. So industrial sand mines are required in several instances to monitor for PM10 particulate. That's particularly true when looking at those who are drying and sizing particulate matter. We also will consider particulate matter as part of mechanical processes of crushing and so on. So at the roughly 15 monitors at 13 facilities, we've managed to collect over 4,978 valid samples at industrial sand mines. And that's through the end of last year. The average concentration is 12.4 milligrams per cubic meter. Keep in mind, the state standard for PM10 is 150. So we are looking at the average across the board being a fraction of the allowable limit. We only look at the PM10 because that is what is expected out of a sand mine. It's a mechanical process. Usually particulate matter of 2.5 is a product of combustion. We did have a high value. We had 168, which was an exceedance of about 112% of the PM10 value. That occurred in April of 2015. And through our investigative studies, looking at the wind speeds and directions, the department has determined that farming activity had contributed towards that value. When you take a look at particulate matter from sand, you also have to recognize that that is a component of soil. Sand is a component of soil, so is silt, so is clay. So if you're out in the field churning up the dust, you're probably kicking up anything that could be measured as a particulate matter of that size. You just don't know until you speciate what source it is, if it is silica or clay or whatever. But from our investigation of this particular site, we feel as though there was a number of contributing factors, some of which was farming. You can find this information on our DNR website, and I'll show you towards the end. how you can find that information, but it's an interactive map. And you can zoom in over each of the pins that have monitors set up, and you can click on it, and where you see the PDF file there, you will see another graph pop up. So if you click the next slide, this is what would pop up if you clicked on that link for the PDF. And at this one, I selected the Wisconsin Proppants-Hixton plant, so that's not too far from here. And as you can see, their maximum value back in 2016, February 2016, was 79 micrograms per liter, so about half the allowable limit. If we were to take a look at all of the samples that they had collected in the last, not quite 3 years on this graph, if you were to draw an average line across all of the points, it'd probably be right around 10 or 12, right where the state's average is for all of the state monitors. So again, re-emphasizing, particulate matter 2.5 is a regional pollutant. It's a product of combustion, so coal burning, wood burning, things like that. It is considered a secondary contaminant and travels quite far and wide. The department monitors regional pollutants for PM 2.5. The closest one we have is in Eau Claire. And to date, even with all of the wildfires up in Canada and so on, the federal requirement for PM 2.5 for air quality standards has never been exceeded. That's the website location, but I'll show you how to find it at the end. Okay, that's air. Now I'm really going to kick up some wind talking about the water programs. Okay, let's take a look. High capacity wells. A number of industrial sand mines will require washing sand that needs high capacity well supply. Not everybody requires it, but many do. And that gives you an idea of how much water a high capacity well can pull. A high capacity well is defined as a well that can draw 100,000 gallons per day or more, or 70 gallon per minute at a time. A property can also be considered a high capacity well property if they have more than one well that does not reach 70 gallon per minute, but does reach that 100,000 gallons per day. Oops, I'll back up there one more. On borehole abandonment, so as exploration is done for looking to see if a property can be mined, core samples are usually taken and analyzed, and what's left behind is the hole that the core was removed from. The department does not permit this, but we do require proper abandonment, and that requires reporting. An industrial sand mine company, if it's big enough, may have a number of employees there. If they exceed 25 employees or more for more than 6 months out of the year, the department will require them to be a public water supply facility. So that will monitor not only the quality, but also the quantity of the water. So they'll now be testing the metals and everything like that that is required under a public water supply. On-site wells could be classified as either public or private. Back when we had the slump and a lot of sand mine companies were laying folks off, some of them converted from being a public water supply to being a private water supply. Okay, so breaking away from high capacity wells, we're now taking a look at surface water regulation. So this takes a look at any mining company that needs to make alterations to waters of the state. Those are navigable waters of the state. And so things like putting in a culvert for a stream crossing, or realigning a stream in order to gain access to a property. Things like that will require permitting from the department under what's called Chapter 30. We take a look at the proximity, we look at the type of resource, we look at the activity. We also look for threatened and endangered species, and virtually every water program in the department will screen for threatened and endangered species as well as cultural resources. This is a very highly sensitive area with the department. Threatened and endangered resources is considered privileged information. So a mining company that looks to come in may or may not have the information about threatened and endangered species or cultural resources unless they work with a cultural resource management firm or if they contact the department to do a screening for them. If it's been determined that these resources exist on the property, the department is the one who makes the determination about threatened and endangered resource protections. Some of those things can include time of year restrictions. Some of them can include barriers. Other things might mean that they will have to get an incidental take permit in order to access that area where the resource might exist. This is generally not considered public information. It is privileged information and highly licensed. So if a threatened and endangered resources species shows up on a property, that is information that is only pertaining to the project at hand and is something that the DNR controls. Cultural resources, on the other hand, is handled through the Wisconsin Historical Society. DNR even has limited access to that information and is a very expensive license to get. It's on the order of some $25,000 per license year. That's why we only have one archaeologist on staff, because he's the only one that has access to that information. If a historical aspect like an Indian mound or something like that should happen to be present, the mining company would have to work directly with the Historical Society to resolve those issues, either through avoidance and or through controlled excavation. So underwater permitting, once they kind of jump over all of those hurdles, our intake specialists are really good at figuring those out. A couple of different types of permits are available. General permits are available and individual permits are available. They have to determine what is being impacted and to what degree the impact is occurring. So if a general permit fits what the project is looking to do, what they'll do is they'll request coverage under a general permit. That is something that the department issues statewide and reissues once every 5 years. Anybody who looks to kind of come under coverage under a general permit will not necessarily go through a public process for that application, but the general permit itself goes through a public process at renewal time. An individual permit, on the other hand, is very specific to the site and the location and to the impacts of the resource. And the facility will undergo a public notice and comment period for that individual permit. So in some circumstances you might not hear about it, in other circumstances you will hear about it. So it all depends on the degree of the impact. Sometimes non-metallic mines have to get what's called an NR 340 permit. It's part of our water regulations under Chapter 30. That kicks in when a pond is created near a navigable waterway. The department will call that a non-metallic mine and reclamation associated with waterway permit. It's different from what the county does. The county does reclamation in upland areas. DNR does reclamation in water resource areas. So it gets very muddy from here on out.
Literally.
Literally. So in any event, there's a lot of water quality standards that have to be met in order for water permits to be issued. That can be anywhere from the quality of the resource to the numeric standards. So there's a lot of different things that the department looks at with regards to a water permit. Okay. Wetland resources. This is probably the area where I think the department has seen the greatest change in legislation recently. But one thing that is very important to note is that the actual standards for wetland permitting has not changed. It is still required that if a wetland is proposed to be impacted or filled, the department will first look at avoidance measures. What alternatives were there to the project that they could have looked at or could have employed to avoid impacting a wetland in the first place? A lot of times they can provide enough information to show that they could not avoid the wetland. So then we begin to take a look at how they can minimize that impact. Rather than going right straight through the gut of the wetland, is there a way we can go to the edge of it? Clip only just a little bit instead of a large acreage. Where some of the sand mine companies do rail loading, that's probably where we see the greatest number of wetland permit applications. So then we begin to take a look at the layout of the rail line or the number of tracks associated with the rail line to see if there's a way we can work with the mine company to reduce that impact. Anything else that's left over that still has to be impacted has to be mitigated for, and that is true regardless of the type of permit that is obtained or even if there is an exemption to permitting. There's still a requirement to follow these standards to avoid, minimize, and mitigate. I think I covered pretty much all of that. Stormwater. So there's guaranteed every mine company has to get a stormwater permit, regardless of whether or not they're impacting waterways and wetlands or not. So up to this point, there's been a lot of gray area with regards to a specific facility. It all depends on what resources exist and what they need to do in order to operate in that area. Stormwater is one they can't get out of. Air permitting is another one they can't get out of. And reclamation is the third thing they can't get out of. Those are the three basic minimums. So everything else is kind of add-on, if you will, if the resource is there or if there's a need to have it. So the stormwater permit is actually a combined permit. It takes a look at runoff and it looks at process wash waters. So if there's wash water, if there's washing of sand taking place on there, the stormwater permit's going to cover regulation and standards associated with that washing. Again, you can see threatened and endangered resources is evaluated just like the other water permits do. A stormwater pollution prevention plan is required for every industrial sand mine company. Used to be that a mine could claim internal drainage and then a stormwater pollution prevention plan was not required. But industrial sand mine companies got their own special permit about 3 years ago. And they are all required to do a stormwater pollution prevention plan regardless of whether they internally drained or not. We still encourage them to be internally drained because we want to be able to hold all that stormwater in place at all possible. But because of the fact that most industrial sand mine companies are changing their topography quite a lot and very frequently fast, we want to have them stay on top of any runoff, potential runoff issues. So we're requiring a stormwater pollution prevention plan. Monitoring is part of the stormwater permit requirements. That includes monitoring stormwater discharges for turbidity and best management practices. Wastewater discharges have some numeric values attached to it. pH, suspended solids, flow volumes are mandatory across the board, whether it's a groundwater discharge or a surface water discharge. Additional monitoring is required depending on the type of discharge that would occur. If discharge is going to be continuous, a set of required parameters for metals is required. If it's an intermittent discharge, like maybe once or twice a year to clear stormwater out so they can get in and access an area, there's an option. Either do the metals or do toxicity testing. They'll actually cover the same thing. One's just more broadly than the other. And then finally, one of the monitoring requirements is that additives are required to be tracked and documented. They have to provide for us what additives they're providing, they're using, and they also have to provide us the amount that they're applying. So I think the most common one would probably be the flocculants, which I believe is a big concern for most folks. And so what they have to do then at that point is they have to actually work through the department before using a flocculant to have it approved. They will go through a review process. The flocculant will be evaluated for toxicity levels. Any use restriction will be applied. All right. So that's kind of in a nutshell most of the regulatory authorities that DNR follows at industrial sand mines. There are probably more that I haven't covered, but those in a nutshell are probably the big ones. So once permits are issued, compliance becomes then the issue. And at industrial sand mine companies, there have been compliance problems in the past, and we've addressed those, worked with the companies at getting them back into compliance, which is our number one goal. Taking a look at what enforcement is for the department. Well, we go through a process called stepped enforcement. We generally don't go straight to DOJ for a down silt fence, okay? We're gonna work with the mining company to address their monitoring needs and their best management practices, making sure everything that's supposed to be in place is in place and doing what it's supposed to do. We're going to be checking to see to make sure that they keep their records. And if we find areas of noncompliance that needs to be addressed, we'll probably start at the NON level, notice of noncompliance, or letter of noncompliance for air compliance. If we have an egregious situation on our hands, like obvious neglect or non-cooperation with the mining company of getting compliance back, we will probably move to a notice of violation. Typically an enforcement conference accompanies a notice of violation. If problems continue to escalate rather than get better, or if we have a seriously egregious event on our hands, that's when we will look at Department of Justice referrals. Some of our programs have citation authority, many do not, but in any case, whether there is citation authority or not, they always have the option to refer to DOJ. Ramifications of violations, of course, is dependent upon the severity of the situation, but the goal is always to regain compliance, because without compliance, the standards don't mean anything. To give you an idea, since about 2011 is when we started tracking the level of compliance that we've had in industrial sand mines. So since that time, we've had roughly 28 notice of violations and enforcement conferences. 5 have received citations. 6 of them we referred to the Department of Justice. And the forfeitures that ranged out of DOJ ranged anywhere from $16,000 to $200,000. I think the vast majority of them are kind of falling in the $50,000 to $70,000 price range. And a lot of people will consider that to be nominal, given the amount of money the industry tends to make. But I'll give you an example. I was deeply involved in the one that brought in the DOJ $200,000 forfeiture, and the costs that the mining company spent to regain compliance was in the millions. The forfeiture, that doesn't come to DNR. That goes into the education fund because DNR cannot be viewed as profiting from the non-compliance of the company. So we don't see that money. Our focus is getting compliance back. And if it means a company having to spend millions of dollars in infrastructure in order to do it, that's what our goal is. 7 of them are considered open. That's because they're probably still waiting on compliance schedules. Some of those have also probably been closed out because as we're working through them, most of these notice of violation enforcement conferences are checking up on progress. Field staff are communicating with our enforcement staff, and we're actively working toward compliance. All right. Okay. Reclamation. So I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation that reclamation is regulated at the county level. They have an ordinance, each county member does, and they will issue a reclamation permit. They receive and review plans, and the department's role is to ensure that the county is following the state statute and standard in a uniform manner. Sometimes folks have been addressing reclamation as a minimum standard, and it's not. It's a uniform standard. And out of 72 counties plus 16 municipalities, it's DNR's job to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same playing level. Each county and each municipality area could have differing environmental conditions that will have differing reclamation requirements. So the department is able to work with each of the county programs to make sure that they're applying it in a reasonable and cohesive fashion. I mentioned the annexations and local programs. I know that that has been a big deal with industrial sand mine companies as well. Some people seem to think that annexing a parcel of property into a municipality is a way to get around regulation. No, those municipalities have to apply the reclamation laws the same way as the counties do, so nobody gets out of anything. We had a lot of proposed reclamation sites that ranged anywhere from 50 acres on up to over 1,000 acres. Our analysis of this some years ago took a look at it. Roughly about 25% of the industrial sand mine companies were under 100 acres. Roughly 50% of the mines fell between 100 acres and 500 acres. We had about 20% that was between 500 and 1,000, and only 6% that were over 1,000 acres. Shoreline zoning, floodplain zoning. DNR again has a series of regulations that we oversee. Those are also held and implemented at the county level. Those will take a look at setbacks to water resources, and they'll also address any flood elevations. That's something that industrial sand mine companies have had to address, that by digging a hole in the ground or chopping into the hillside, are they changing flood elevations for a municipality? And so DNR provides support to the municipalities from an engineering perspective with regards to how those are being affected by the sand mining operations. All right. Okay, first slide. If you want to get to our website and find all that wonderful information about the air monitoring and about water regulation, you go to our homepage. Just a general search engine for WDNR will get you there. And if you put in the search word box, even if you just put sand mining, you'll go right to the main page. But if you put in industrial sand mining, what you'll get is a series of hits back on it, and what you want to get is the industrial sand mining one. And when you click on that, you will go to the overview page of industrial sand mining. This is kind of the general overview page that I think most everybody will hit first and get a lot of general information on. From mining companies, on the right-hand side, there's additional links for information for industry. The public is welcome to view that too. It's not blocked or anything. Anybody can look at it. But it's more specific to what permits are required and what type of regulation, application materials and things like that. There are other links on the side that you can learn about. The Wisconsin Towns Association has a great website. They also have handbooks and connections to the Wisconsin Counties Association where you can find handbooks. The Wisconsin Industrial Sand Association is also a good resource. They have a number of white papers with regards to their operations that are informative. And if you want to learn a little bit more about what happens to the sand when it leaves Wisconsin, EPA has some information about hydraulic fracturing, and we have a link for that on that too. Bear in mind, Wisconsin has no oil or gas reserves, so hydraulic fracturing is not occurring in Wisconsin. Just the sand mining for it. All right. Now, are we taking questions now or at the end?
No, we'll have our next presenter, and then we'll do that. We'll go that way.
All right, sounds good.
No, that's fine.
As we explained at the beginning, we want to have everyone, the panel, give their explanations of what they do. And if you do have a question, I ask that you, because in essence of time, so that everyone has it, because there may be an answer from the next presenter to a question that you may present. Okay, that's how the meeting was formatted. That's how it was explained at the beginning. I appreciate everyone understanding that.
True.
I don't have a PowerPoint. I talk really fast, so I'll probably be done in about 5 minutes. I'm Tracy Arnold. I work for County Land Conservation. I'm in charge of the reclamation part of the mines. So they have a reclamation plan on file with me. I do annual inspections of the mine sites. I am in charge of the annual permit fees, financial assurance. What financial assurance is, if for whatever reason the company goes bankrupt, they leave town, the county can go and seize that money. I bid out the reclamation and we get it reclaimed. Reclamation is at the very end of it. So what it looks like once it's all done. So that it's not an eyesore, that's what I'm in charge of. We currently right now have 64 permitted sites in Wood County. That's not just frac sand, that's everybody. So the little mom and pop gravel, we have peat, limestone, sandstone, anything like that. So we have 64 active permits in Wood County. Specific frac sand is probably, I'd say 10 to 12 off the top of my head. We've definitely seen the rise and the valleys and the rise of this industry. Right now we're climbing again. I've met with a lot of the neighbors. The Nelsons had come in. Lori, I don't see Lori, but I'm betting she's here. Oh, there you are. They came into the office. I sat down with them for about 2 hours. I showed them all the data that I have on my computer with all the different permits that I have. I have pictures every year. The IT department hates me, but I just keep taking lots of pictures. Pictures say 1,000 words and then I don't have to. I do GPS of every single site every year. Some counties, I just talked to a county that's south of us, I won't tell you which one, but there was one south of us, they have 4 non-metallic sites, and they haven't been on that site in 3 years. I go every single time, every single year. You feel free to walk with me. I put on about 70 miles in about a week and a half. If you want to walk, you're more than welcome to. Non-metallic and metallic are 2 different things. There was a lot of questions. On Tuesday, I went on the tour to the Pinecrest, is that what Pinecrest site? So I met a lot of you guys. We're a lot drier today than we were then. It poured the entire time we were there. There was some questions about the metallic. It's completely different. So metallic is metal that's coming out of the ground. Non-metallic is anything that's not metal, so the sand, rock, gravel, peat, limestone, anything like that. That ordinance in Wood County has been in effect since 2001. The metallic one has just been kind of in the news this summer, so if you Google mining in Wisconsin, there's a good chance the metallic stuff's going to come up. But we're working on another ordinance. It's in the process. It's getting rolling. It's just we don't have it yet, but we're getting there. So if you're researching stuff and you find metallic mining and you're like, it's totally different than non-metallic. Okay? Any questions, anything that I'm missing? I've talked to a lot of you on the phone too, so if you have questions, let me know. Any questions? Yes. Oh, sorry. That question's
Well, I think that leaves me. My name is John Dustman, and I'm a geologist and a hydrogeologist. I'm kind of a water guy. And after getting involved in this industry, I think I probably should have gone into air quality instead of water, given my last name is Dustman. No, I actually started my career in the oil fields of Williston, North Dakota back in 1980. And then I went on to finish a degree at Montana State. And then I worked for the Minnesota DOT for 3 years, both in materials. I helped design the rock cuts up on the North Shore, if you've ever been up on 61 near Grand Marais. I helped to design those. But I also I started writing environmental impact statements for transportation projects. And that's kind of where my interest got into identifying the impacts and then actually helping to prevent environmental problems. And so I think I started on my first mining project in about 1991. And I've worked at mines across the country. We're a very small niche company. We've got about 50 people in River Falls, St. Paul, New Hope, Burnsville, and Reno, Nevada. We have archaeologists running around the deserts trying to keep the mining companies from destroying historical artifacts. So what we've done in Wisconsin, we've been very involved in the sand business. in being a hydrogeologist, I've been studying the formations that go to make up Minnesota and Wisconsin for over 30 years. Interesting enough, the formations that are outcropping over here some places are actually, 300 to 400 feet underneath the Twin Cities and make up the Twin Cities' sole source aquifer. And so I didn't know that I was studying them for mining, but I was when I was studying them as an aquifer underneath the Twin Cities. So what our firm has been hired to do is to evaluate what the environmental impacts of any mine is, but in particular this one, and then to apply our expertise to try to help minimize impacts, mitigate impacts, and then most importantly maybe over the long term is to monitor for impacts. And so we helped develop the reclamation plan. We've done many of these. I think we had one of the first in Wood County many years ago. And I think we take a different approach to reclamation than most people do. We want to try to leverage the property to have something beneficial come out of the project at the end. And so being a hydrogeologist, when we did the borings on this particular site, we recognized that it was a very rare kind of area within Wood County because the bedrock that we were encountering is not, it's much higher in the stratigraphic column than most of the other bedrock around the county. And I don't have a lot of visuals, but I do have one that I would like to show you, and that is the stratigraphic column. Oh. So the reason the rocks were laid down the way they were is because about 500 million years ago, this was a very stable area of a very, very large continent. And so this area was called the stable craton because it wasn't undergoing all the mountain building events that the Rockies and the Appalachians were doing. And so for hundreds of millions of years, sediments accumulated in this ocean environment. So when the ocean was big and deep, limestones formed in deep oceans. Limestones and shales. Limestones and what are called dolomites, same thing. If you know of any quarries that are mining limestone or dolomite, they were formed in hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of feet of water. And it's primarily organisms that are dying in the water and migrating and just filtering down to the bottom, and then they accumulate and it forms rock. The shales, if it's pure shale, it's more than likely formed somewhere between the bottom of the shore and the beach, and what they call the rise. So if you were to ever go down to the Gulf of Mexico and go off the coast of New Orleans or Houston, you're going to find a lot of muck. And that's because rivers are taking all the sediment from the land and spreading it out into the ocean, but the energy of the stream is gone pretty much by the delta. And so what happens beyond the delta is it's just mud, thick accumulations of mud. Mud turns into shale, that's what it is. So then that only leaves the beach. And yes, I can tell you that this was a great beachfront property only 480 million years ago. So what happened was this ocean kept going, and so you have what are called interbedded. It goes from limestone, shale, sandstone, limestone, shale, sandstone. So this happened many times over this hundreds of millions of years. The seas were coming and going and forming then this stratigraphic column. And so in geology speak, we have different eras. This is the time scale over here. And then we get down to the formation name. And if you look at the formation names, Galena, Decorah, Platteville, Glenwood, St. Peter, Shakopee, Oneota, Jordan, St. Lawrence, if you'll notice, they're names of places. And, as most people know, Wisconsin's better than Minnesota, so you have more of these than Minnesota does, but it's kind of a split. So like the Galena, it's called the type section. Believe it or not, there were geologists in the late 1800s, and they would cruise around and they would map the formation, and they really were like road cuts or rock outcrops. So wherever the formation was first described, that's what got the designation as the type section of that rock. So you can be sure if you went to Platteville, you'd see this limestone, That's the geologic symbol for limestone. Sand is this light yellow color. Here we see that same limestone. And then shales are kind of just horizontal lines. And so we'll talk a little bit. I gotta scroll down a little bit. So where are you guys sitting? Most of the geology of Wood County is way down in here. In fact, most of it is down in this area. And so that's why there aren't a ton of sand mines in Wood County, is because about 10 years ago, when this really started, the oil companies were looking for a much coarser sand. The coarser the better, because they felt that oil could flow through the coarse grains. Well, these formations don't have a lot of that at all. And so everybody was more interested in the Jordan sandstone, the Waniwak. The Waniwak represents probably, I don't know, help me Steve, 95% of the mines in Wisconsin are in the Waniwak formation. Well, that's what's on this property. We believe it is the lower Waniwak, which, again, even 10 years ago, the lower Waniwak wasn't really, it's about 100 feet thick, and so there was about 50 feet of good Waniwak and 50 feet of not so good Waniwak. Well, what happened in the industry was they found that the finer grain sandstones, when you stuck them down the wells, they didn't crush as easy. They had higher strength. Kind of makes sense. You have big marbles, big glass marbles, and you put pressure on them, they're going to start cracking. The smaller and smaller and smaller those marbles are, the more pressure they can take, and so they have more compressive strength. So the lower Waniwak became viable as a potential for mining. So that's the geology perspective, but from a water perspective, you are blessed with having pretty much the Eau Claire around at least this entire area. It isn't present in other parts of the county, but in this part of the county, because the Waniwak is present, so is the Eau Claire, and so is the Mount Simon for most point. The Mount Simon, real quickly, is a prolific aquifer. It runs from Chicago to St. Cloud, the entire, pretty much all of Iowa, and it's probably one of the most prolific aquifers in the upper Midwest. The Twin Cities is saving it. You're not allowed to put a well in the Mount Simon because they're saving it for future generations. And one of the reasons they're saving it is because the Eau Claire is a fantastic protection layer. It is considered a confining layer or a semi-confining layer by most hydrogeologists. What does that mean? That means that the Eau Claire has many, many layers of shale in it. And they can be the thickness of a piece of paper, they can be the thickness of this table, they can be tens of feet thick. And so whenever you have a shale, it's kind of like this tabletop. I was going to bring a bottle of water. If I poured a bottle of water on this table and didn't pour enough for it to roll off, what would happen to that water? It would stay there, or it would stay there until it evaporated. But underneath the ground, there's not a lot of evaporation. So they're called confining layers because nothing can go through them. So you're kind of blessed in that way, is because there isn't just one of these layers, there's many, many, many of them. And some are on the scale of this room, some are on the scale of a city block, some are on the scale of the entire county. So they're areally extensive in some places, and they do what's called pinch out in other areas. But it's a great protective barrier for your domestic well. I would say most of your domestic wells that are within, say, a half a mile of the proposed site, you're either in the Waniwak or the Eau Claire, unless you've got a feed, a cattle operation, or have a high capacity well. Unlikely that you can even get a high capacity well in the Eau Claire. It's just too fine grain and there's too much shale. So you can get a nice house well, you can get 20, 50 gallons a minute. You're going to be very, very lucky to get 200 to 500 gallons a minute out of the Eau Claire. You can do that out of the Mount Simon. And so if you are a neighbor that has a dairy or a cattle or irrigation going on, it's likely that you do have a Mount Simon well. And so what are we doing? What have we been hired to do? Let me check. I can't, there isn't Wi-Fi, and I can't even get Verizon here. I just got pictures from my guy. We installed, last week, I installed 4 monitoring wells. And we had locations, and then I changed them and changed them again, but I feel comfortable. We've got 4 decent wells. We've got we got one to the north, one to the south, one to the west, and then actually another one to the south, because I think groundwater likely flows to the southwest, west-southwest. I'm hedging my bets, but.
You don't need to be a geologist to know that.
What's that?
You don't need to be a geologist.
Well, there you go. Well, there you go. Well, there's actually a map divide on the property, so you do. If you were to stand on the other side of the property, groundwater would be flowing to the east.
So the monitoring wells have already been put in?
Yes. And we wanted to do that because the water level, if you're planning a lake and a park, and you're trying to minimize the impact of the way you go to mine a property, the groundwater elevation is pretty darn important. So we were given the latitude to put some wells in to be able to calculate what the water level is, number one, but also which way it's flowing and how fast it's flowing. What these wells allow us to do.
Monitoring wells, they're
Yes.
not drawing water.
No, they're just monitoring wells. They're 4-inch monitoring wells that we drilled. I found the water. I put the wells in, and today we instrument them with pressure transducers. I think one of the reasons we were hired is we have a patent on a brand new technology that we are hopefully is going to change the way that regulatory bodies are able to look at real-time data. So we installed a sensor into the well that senses to 1/100 of a foot the amount of water that's over the top of it. It also senses the temperature. So as of right now, we're collecting hourly data on the 4 wells, and we've written all the software necessary to beam that data through the internet, through a software program that we can look at the groundwater in real time. And the real time isn't important, it's the continuous time. It's watching what happens to water over time. If we see a change in the water level, there has to be an explanation for it. Plain and simple. It's either because it rained a whole bunch yesterday, probably not yesterday. We can actually watch the groundwater recharge from a recent rain event. But we can also see pumps turning on and off. We can see long-term trends. We can see long-term groundwater going up, long-term drought with groundwater going down. We can watch your well turn on and off. We can watch your neighbor's well turn on and off. We can determine interference. And the good thing is that for a hydrogeologist, if you can pump here and measure the drawdown over here that isn't pumping, that tells us everything. Groundwater does flow under the laws of nature, physics, mathematics. It's water flowing through a porous media. And if you know the drawdown with a pumping well, you can calculate what are called aquifer parameters. And you can then do modeling, you can figure out what would happen if you changed your mining. But at the very least, we can determine what the impacts both in water quantity and water quality are from any operation. We do this for Grande Cheese, if you are familiar with them. They have 5 Italian cheese manufacturing plants all around Wisconsin, and we're doing this for them in real time. We do this for agriculture. We do this for irrigation. We do it for cities, municipalities. We're installing this technology for the city of Mobile right now, down in Alabama. Yesterday I was in Shreveport, and I drove home last night, so I'm tired. That's why. So you know what, I'm going to end it there. We've got the whole site in a geographic information system. We have tons and tons of layers. For those of you who haven't seen the reclamation plan, I'm sure you can get a copy from those that we provided it to. If you want, ask me and we can post it. It is in draft format right now. We need to make that real clear. Tracy's going to bleed all over it. So I just assume we wait to get it out until such time as Tracy's had time to review it. Other than that, we'll open it up to questions. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm Roland Hawk, I'm Wood County Highway Commissioner. I have nothing to do with the site. And I have no PowerPoint or presentation to make in that manner, but my role is to protect our infrastructure and our roadway. when I came to Wood County as the engineer a number of years ago, the frac sand industry had just came to Wood County, and I was brought in to help make some assumptions and some adjustments and how we're going to protect our roadways. Many of you were probably at many of those meetings. There was a scary point in our time where it was unknown what was going to happen. And all we had to go by was examples in other counties and other municipalities. It turned out to be a very pleasant opportunity for Wood County to meet folks who are coming here to do business. We saw this as an opportunity to reach out and partner with our folks that were bringing jobs and bringing opportunities here to mine sand. We didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what to expect from us. It took a little while to kind of go through this process. We reached some agreements, and I think through those long-term relationships, I feel very comfortable moving forward with a project like this because I've met with the folks who are in charge here. They've kind of given me their background and what we're going to expect from them. My goal is to work with them and help them be able to access their site, hopefully 12 months out of the year. Currently, we are working on some data for the road in which they're going to be accessing the site. And luckily, we were looking already to do some upgrades there in the near future. And with their timing, it was perfect. We'll probably look at making some adjustments to what we were originally going to do to assist them in being able to maybe make that site accessible 12 months out of the year. I'm not far enough along in my collection to know exactly what that's going to be and what the costs are going to be, but I feel very confident that with a little bit of time, we'll have some plans. We'll sit down with the gentleman here and kind of work up an arrangement that they'll feel comfortable with. My bosses are going to feel comfortable with, because even what I present to them still needs to go through their approvals. But we've had some discussions already on what we're looking to do, and I don't see a lot of issues here. My role is to help protect our infrastructure. It's about 1.5 miles of Highway B that we're looking at, and that's an important piece of road for anybody that uses it, but it's going to be more important for these folks when they start mining that site to get their product in and out of there. So I'm going to leave it at that. Like I said, I don't have a presentation, I don't have a lot of data, but I will vouch for Tracy. She does a great job of inspecting our mines, because we own a mine. It's on Highway B in town of Cary, and she visits my site every year and gives me updates on what we need to do to stay compliant. So I'll wait and answer questions when the group is ready.
Thank you, everyone. Now, if it's all right for the presenters, if we could just have them all in the front here, sort of put you on the spot. In the front, 5 chairs, and we'll field questions. Once again, please keep your questions short, to the point, and allow them to answer fully before you bombard them with more questions. It would be very much appreciated. Thank you. This is an open format. Raise your hand, they'll acknowledge you.
John, how deep are your monitoring wells?
Fortunately, we hit groundwater. What I tried to do was to stay, even though I'm not hooked up to the internet, I can use some of the figures, I think, for the rec plan. So if we come back, here is the groundwater contour map. And so the shallow groundwater map, now this was done, I think, back in the 70s for most counties, and it shows this little dotted line here, which is the groundwater divide, which is a fairly rare phenomenon. You don't find that. I'm not sure I believe it's there or not, but we'll find out. And so you can see the groundwater kind of through the site, they said was 1,200. It's going to turn out that it's probably closer to 1,195. And so to save some money on drilling, I stayed low and I stayed on the 1,200 contour. And groundwater at each spot was about 5 feet. So that's why I'm calling groundwater at about 1,195. And we ended up putting a well. Let me find a good map for that. Well, let's go down. I said I was going to put one there, and I ended up putting it right about there. I moved it north because I wanted it north of the processing area. I put one here because I thought if there is a westerly component to groundwater flow, this is where the processing would be done, so this would be pretty close, and it would be a good place to monitor what's happening away from the processing area. And then I ended up putting one here, and then I ended up putting one down in the corner where there's a deer stand where this field goes to the south. And that was pretty much for hunting deer. No, that was to give me 4 wells. Our software will let us see what's happening inside that entire rectangle. So I tried to get one, in the direction of what I thought groundwater flow was when they get over here in more than several years. But in years to come, I wanted a well that would monitor what was happening when they were monitoring or mining over there. So the wells are shallow, they're 15 feet deep. For a monitoring well, you don't want the water to be above the top of the screen. Why? Because if there's lighter than water contaminants, you wouldn't see them. And that comes from a guy who's cleaned up many gasoline and oil and jet fuel spills. So I wanted a monitoring well where I could know that the water was below the top of the screen, so anything floating will get detected in the well.
Do you have good satellite? Did you have good signal on all those sites?
We do on this site because it's so high. The top of the site's 1230, and so we had absolutely no issues with Verizon coverage.
Really?
Yeah, no. Well, and here's why. No. Here's why. Here's why. And this is really where when I said this was new technology, I'm not kidding. It's less than about 2 years. And I was doing an aquifer test for a farmer up in very northwestern Minnesota, and I couldn't get AT&T to work. So I bought 10 Verizon modems, and I came back to the cities and I got a call from a salesperson at Verizon, and they said, you don't need to tell us what you're doing, but what are you doing? Why did you buy 10 modems in Thief River Falls, Minnesota? And I explained it, and she said, would you come in and talk to our engineers? Because we're trying to get our head around this whole Internet of Things technology. And for those that don't know what the Internet of Things is, it's machines talking to machines through the internet rather than humans talking to machines. And so these sensors that we've put in the ground can talk to each other, but Verizon developed their own data network. It's not the data and cell network on the regular towers. It's a specific business data network, and we're going through that, and you don't need nearly the coverage that they have. Much better coverage with that. So if you lose your cell around MacArthur and V, we're not using the same towers. So we have great connection. In fact, we installed all the sensors today. I didn't tell you that. The sensors are in, so within about a week we'll be getting, we need the top of the casings, we need them surveyed to feet above sea level to 1/100th of a degree. And when we do that, we'll then have groundwater elevations to 1/100th of a degree every hour for the life of the mine.
And I have one other question. Roland Hawk, where are you from?
Wood County Highway.
Where are you from in Wisconsin? Where do you live?
Port Edwards.
Port Edwards.
My name is James. I'm from Town of Rock. So how often is the air and water monitored? How often are the data that you take audited? How far away do you go to monitor air and water? And what's your reclamation for if it's found out of compliance? What is the mitigation to take care of that? How quickly does that happen? And does the mine shut down for that period?
That's like 46 questions.
For DNR permitting processes, the permit will determine what is monitored and the frequency of monitoring. The stormwater permit requires quarterly monitoring. It also requires.
What are you monitoring? Are you monitoring a well on that property, or are you going to test all of our wells in the 3-mile radius?
What's the radius?
We'll keep this. Keep the questions to one at a time. Okay, number one, and let them finish answering before you bombard them with another question.
Okay,
Please.
So with regards to monitoring wells, DNR will put in high-capacity well permits monitoring for flow volume. DNR does not have authority to require water quality of a well unless it's a public water supply. And then it has to meet drinking water standards. So everything that's in NR 140 has to be met. That is done as the permit decides with regards to the frequency, the number of staff, and the volumes that are used each year.
So is it audited then? Does somebody come back and do an independent audit of
A
this?
report is required under the permit, and the DNR reviews the reports and contacts the facility if anything is out. We did have an example.
If something is out of compliance, what happens then?
Yep, we did have a facility that had a public drinking water supply that was out of compliance for arsenic levels. And the EPA had a specific enforcement process. A second sample was taken, and that also was out of compliance for arsenic. So there were a number of requirements under that enforcement for which they had to mitigate for that. In that particular situation, they opted to drill a new drinking water well. Part of the reason for that is that the drinking water well that was drilled for the mine facility was seated in a geologic layer that had naturally occurring contaminants. And the only way that they could provide clean drinking water for their employees was to drill a new well. Now, with regards to high-capacity wells, the purpose of the high-capacity well comes into play with what needs to be monitored for. An industrial sand mine company will not have the same requirements as a water bottling company. Like I brought with me a bottle of Dasani water. They will have more strict requirements than an industrial sand mine company. So use, volume, and application is what driven in the permit requirements.
So there's no testing being done independently? This is all information you're getting from the company itself?
It is required for them to provide the information in order to get a permit.
Get a permit, and then you're saying that the whole crux of your speech seemed to be that the whole thing was about monitoring, and you're telling me that the company is monitoring itself, basically, giving you reports.
In order for them to be compliant, the monitoring has to meet certain criteria. They have to use certified testing laboratories. Without all of those in place, we cannot accept the data. So
But you're going on what they tell you, basically, and then you're looking over what they tell you, and then see if there's a violation.
Well, there's
there's always a component to question.
a lab. She said there's a.
Yeah,
No,
that's-
here, I can answer that. Our firm provides a lot of independent third-party monitoring for Badger, High Crush, Piranha, Total Excavating. And we go, so either the local conditional use permit will call out the number of wells, where the wells are located, and the frequency. Okay, that's something that is normally done in a conditional use permit. Because it isn't regulated in the frequency, duration, location. And so, yes, ultimately it is the mining company who's paying the data and reporting the data, but it is constantly being audited by everybody involved.
Are you involved at your company?
Absolutely,
In this mine,
yeah.
this particular mine? So you
Yes.
have a long-term contract then to monitor that?
We've been retained to provide the environmental consulting on this site. I guess we put the wells in. It's our proprietary data set. I assume we're going to be the ones that are sampling the wells.
I'm just
Yeah.
asking. I don't know anything about this.
To add a little bit to it, when we say they have to use an accredited laboratory and qualified individuals for taking samples, DNR actually runs the certification process for laboratories. So we will do the auditing of the laboratories as well as the processes for which analysis and data collection is done.
Can I answer the reclamation question that you had?
Sure.
Right at the end?
Absolutely.
The reclamation, if they're not in compliance, I go out there and I do inspections on them annually, and I know you're like, okay, you're out there once. If I get a call, I go out there. We drive, there's
Call from
5, you.
Oh.
If you say, I don't think this is right, call me. I'll go out there. I have no problems with it. I have state statute that I can go out on those sites if there's mining, so I can go out to any site that I need to. If I need to bring sheriffs with me, I bring them, which I've done. Normally I don't have to, but it has happened.
But your reclamation is at the end. I'm talking during the process. Do they get
Call me.
audited out there?
Yeah, I go out there every year.
No. Let's address that right away. The reclamation is continuous. That's the whole reason we designed it the way we did. If you look at the rec plan, it's in phases. The phases are nominally about 10 acres. And reclamation starts immediately, and 10 acres is about a season of mining. So the reclamation of that area starts the day that they leave that cell. So it's not going to be a big open pit for 20 years and then get something that gets done with it. It's going to become a lake and a wetland complex along the way.
And that is a state statute, by the way. It's called contemporaneous reclamation. And there's a lot of really good incentives in the state statute to drive continuous reclamation processes. It's in the form of fees and bonding amounts. Typically, open acreage is what is required to be bonded. And if they continue to open new acreage without closing up new acreage, that's more money that they have to put in the bank and hold on bond. It is also what drives the fees that the counties assess. And so it's a cost-saving measure for a mining company to reclaim as they go, to help hold down their out-of-pocket expenses, if you will, for reclamation. Oh boy, we generated some good questions now.
So the question on testing water, you're talking about testing their water. Who's testing my water?
Yes. Who's testing mine? Yeah.
That is not a requirement under your DNR permits.
Okay, and that's
So nobody up there is responsible for making sure I'm safe.
I am. Sure.
How are you testing my water? You got sample of it. You're not testing my
No,
water.
again, there's going to be a conditional use permit application that has to get done. And in every conditional use permit application I've ever seen on every mine that I've ever been involved with, I'm using a lot of evers, I'm pretty sure this is correct, there is that wells within X feet of the mine will have their well tested X number of times per year for these specific contaminants.
And what is it for ours?
So
What
I'd
is
like
the number
to,
of miles for our wells? in
That
this
is all,
county?
that has all been
Yeah.
stated so far in the conditional use permit
I'd like to
application.
also-
It
Only
has been-
residents within 300 feet of this mine.
Nobody's told us
At,
anything.
at this point, the original proposal stated 300 feet of the outside of the mine. That is all to be determined.
And I would like to think that we're going to use good science, because that's why we put the 4 wells in. With the 4 wells, I can tell with the direction groundwater is flowing, I can tell how fast it's going. Why would we sample a well a half a mile away if it would take 20 years for a particle of water to get there? That doesn't make any good common sense.
to the question of responsibility for the wells, I would like to also point out that legislation has changed tremendously with regards to the department's authorities with regards to wells and their impacts to neighboring wells. We had gone through, in the very beginning portions, all the DNR could look at was impacts to municipal wells. And when we had a case with Lake Beulah with a drawdown of a high-capacity well of that lake, a judge set case law that said now we have to look at impacts to surface waters when reviewing a high-capacity well. Then the Rosendale Dairy situation occurred, and we had to look at impacts to individual neighboring wells. And then at some point along the line, the Attorney General was petitioned to identify exactly what DNR's authorities were under statute, and the Attorney General determined that DNR's authorities were only written in law as pertaining to municipal wells. So that's where DNR is at with its authorities. Everything else becomes a local matter.
Is this well a done deal? And if it is anything we have to say going to make any impact on anything?
So DNR has not received any high-capacity well permits. We haven't even received any permits for this project up to this point. So any monitoring that is being done is at the request of the company to learn baseline information before having a high-capacity well go in. Monitoring wells are there to evaluate what the pre-existing conditions of the lay of the land and groundwater is before mining occurs.
Yeah, right now, it's not, it doesn't appear to us that a high-capacity well will be necessary. Because groundwater is so shallow, you literally can go down, and the sand is so, what I call friable, you call soft. You can just dig it with a backhoe. It is bedrock, but it is so soft that you just dig it with a backhoe. I think, Doug, you guys were out there and just literally dug it with a backhoe, and when you get below the water table, it just fills right in. So the wells that we put in will not only be for water quality purposes, but when we stick a pump in an open pit and we turn it on and we pump it over to another pit, it's going to create what's called a cone of depression. And we're going to be able to see that with the monitoring wells that we stuck in. Okay? And so let me be clear. The difference between the Winding Walk and the Eau Claire is night and day. They don't communicate. And the mine isn't going down into the Eau Claire. It's going to be at the bottom of the Winding Walk, the top of the Eau Claire. So the Eau Claire formation should not be affected in any way, shape, or form unless there is a high-capacity well in it, which you heard me say earlier, it's really unlikely that we can even put a high-capacity well in it because it doesn't give up water fast enough to do that. So if you have a Winding Walk well and you live down gradient of the facility, certainly we will test your well. But as a professional hydrogeologist, I'm telling you, you shouldn't be drinking out of it now. Because when we sample the baseline conditions, I'll bet you dinner at any restaurant of your choice that there's nitrates in that well. So,
I wasn't talking about the well, I'm talking about the mine, the project coming in. Is there anything anybody can do to stop it if that's what? Is it just a done deal and we gotta do it?
So DNR will evaluate permits, and they have to be coming through as an application process. And if anybody who applies, be it a mine or a manufacturing plant or building a mall, if they can't meet the standards, they don't get the permit. But if they meet the standards, they get the permit. That is DNR's authority on that. And with regards to siting and zoning and conditional use, DNR doesn't get involved with that. That's all the local level type conversations.
Can I ask a kind of a global question? This being the fourth public meeting in regards to this project, and given this 451-page report, we were told as citizens of this town of Rock that all the state work has been done, all the county work has been done, and now we have about 35 days left to approve a conditional use permit with the assumption that that information has been done, but clearly the highway stuff hasn't been done. No application's been received by the state of Wisconsin. So what authority or what are we supposed to base our conditional use questions upon?
Well, that falls completely onto me, Jim. I apologize. The conditional use permit, the packet that you have, I read through it also, and the worst thing I did was I assumed. Okay, I thought that, and I had stated, and I will put this on record, that yes, I stated that the permits were filed and the work was done with the state and the county. That was I apologize for that. Apparently,
I'm not looking for blame, Pete. I'm just kind of stating fact that we're in a position now as a community, and we don't have a clue whether they're going to get their applications are going to be approved, whether the route of transportation for the trucks are going to be approved, but we're asked to approve a conditional use permit without all the information. That seems a bit backwards.
I just want to touch on the transportation part of it. That has nothing to do with the conditional use permit. That's solely.
But it does to us.
Well,
yeah.
I know, but I'm saying is that has nothing to do with the conditional use permit for the site.
Understand.
From a county highway standpoint, that road actually is open to their traffic today. They would fall under the the spring restrictions just like everybody else would.
Sure.
And when I discussed their site, our conversation was can they have location or access on the highway? And they're entitled to an access to the highway. Can they haul 12 months out of the year? And currently they cannot. They asked if there could be improvements, and I explained to them where we were in our highway program. And those are things that will not affect their conditional use permit.
It won't from the county's perspective, but it sure as heck will from a town of Rock perspective, because we have the opportunity to put additional parameters and requirements on the Cooley Frac Sand Mine Company if we so decide, based upon the economics of having to replace roads, repair roads, etc. Is that not a fair statement?
It's not exactly a fair statement, because their access is coming onto a county highway. The town, if this access was going onto a town road, the town could make any requirements of that they want.
Okay.
But at this time, I have to treat them like every other business that's looking for access to the highway. And they've provided me data, how many trips and all the other information that's coming forward. And it's not an exaggerable amount, that's an odd word to use, but it's not an excessive amount of hauling compared to some other sites.
But it's more than what we have currently. And do you know the the arrival as well as the departure routes? Have they identified that?
Yes, they provided me that.
Where are they? What's the route? What are the routes?
The route they've asked for
Yeah.
is to use County Trunk Highway V Victor.
Yeah.
To and from? Because
To
we
and
heard
from.
N was going to be a road that was going to be used as well.
What I said to them is there's a chance that if we use that route as their route in our agreement, and anytime that Highway V would not be passable for, say, a construction project or something like that, I would have to designate to them an option, an alternate route. So that would be an alternate route. And we would not, I, as a commissioner, would not put them onto a town road to, cause any damage or harm to your roads. So our agreement with the company would be with the highway department, and our goal would be to maintain their traffic on our system. And in likelihood, if there was a project on Highway V, my goal would try to keep them on that section of road to begin with, so that that's the least amount of hauling that has to happen.
Can I just...
You own a mine? Did you say you own one of these sand crack mines?
I do not own mine.
Oh, I thought you said
No,
that.
he's in charge. When he talks about his mine, he talks about the county's mine.
Oh.
That's his mine, is
Oh, okay, cool.
the gravel quarries and everything else.
It's not an industrial sand mine either, it's a hard rock quarry. Hard rock quarry.
Sorry for that.
What number of trucks per day did they tell you that we would
I
send?
don't have that in front of me right now. I don't. They gave me the numbers, and actually what we've done some preliminary soil borings and corings of the road. We're putting that together right now to see how that will affect the future improvements.
If I may, Pete, just I don't mean to regard the questions here, but just for informational purpose, I think the people who perhaps are here for the first meeting for this issue need to know that the Town of Rock Board and appointed by the chairman of the Town of Rock has appointed a committee, an ad hoc committee of citizens to basically the purpose of the committee is to come up with a number of concerns from the community so we can get questions and make recommendations to the zoning commission, so then the commission can then pass it along to the town board for consideration. Like I mentioned, this is the fourth meeting that's been held in regards to this issue. My name is Jim Schmidt. I'm the chair of the committee, the unofficial chair of the committee at this point. If I could have other committee members stand up. Liz is also on the committee. Again, this is appointed by the town chair. We also have Kay Varsho here. We also have Jeff Ott and Dave Bensky as well that are on this committee. And I just wanted to let you know that we haven't really met formally yet, though we've had agendas for 2 different meetings. Both meetings have been called for by the Cooley Frac Sand people, which we appreciate. We're all trying to get as much information as we possibly can. And our meeting schedule is posted on the town website. Basically, we start Wednesday the 5th, and we do Monday, Wednesday for the consecutive weeks after that. All of them starting at 7 o'clock, and they'll be here. The intent as the committee chair is to identify, and there's actually been a very strong citizens group already formed to get information, ask questions about this issue. They have provided a lot of information to us as a committee. The major intent of our first meeting is to identify all the questions that have asked up to that point, all the concerns that have been expressed up to that point, to put it in a PowerPoint presentation so everyone here and those who aren't even here can get up to speed on the number of questions and things like that that have already taken place. So I just thought it important to clarify that what's been going on thus far. So I'm going to sit down.
Are your names and phone numbers?
Yes, on the website. If you look at the Town of Rock
website?
website, our names and our contact information is on the website. We're happy to take calls. I had a conversation at 4:30 about this, didn't we, Pete? Yes. So we're certainly happy to take calls.
Please come to every meeting that you
So,
possibly
and there was a lot of questions, and we're taking notes, so we get as much information as we can, so we can represent you and ask the appropriate questions and put the appropriate requirements on, because we have the opportunity as a community, as a zoning commission, as a town board, to require additional things other than what's included in this 451-page document.
Which is also posted on the town's
Yes.
website, and has been for the past 2 weeks.
When do your meetings start? Does your meeting start already yet?
No, we start Wednesday the 5th, next
All
Wednesday.
at 7 o'clock.
All at 7 o'clock.
Thank you, Jim.
Do we have the power to say no to this?
Yeah. When is the deadline?
Do we?
No.
17th.
If we decide as a committee to say no, do we have the power to say no to this?
As a committee, we are advisory only. We will make recommendations to the zoning commission, and the zoning commission will make recommendations to the board.
That's exactly right. And the town is bound by Act 67, which was signed in November of 2017. Act 67 is in total regards to conditional use permits.
And we were previously identified as Act 4. That's the way the confusion what Tracy mentioned about the metallic versus non-metallic mining. We were given bad advice, in my opinion, from the Wisconsin Towns Association. That's a document and handbook we're utilizing as a playbook on what to do and what not to do. That information as of today or yesterday, we found out is not applicable.
So as a town,
So
are
we
entitled to-
fall under Act 67. A conditional use permit, I don't have the wording in front of me, and I will get it. Because I have it verbatim from
It's
the...
important to be involved in your local government and come to as many meetings as you possibly can. And next time there's more zoning
I got it, Pete.
requirements to be made, please be here and sound your voice. It's the only way this kind of stuff can change.
Just a point of information, where is the split between those two aquifers at what level? Just because I'm on that dotted line and I'm just kind of curious.
We think it's at 1175. We drilled, I don't know, 7 borings. I think actually we drilled 6 and somebody else before us drilled another 4. And we looked at their logs and we came to the conclusion that the top of the Eau Claire is at 1175.
So that, just to clarify, the Yellow River aquifer goes to the northeast, and the Black River aquifer goes to the southwest. So it affects potentially a larger geographical area. Is that a fair statement?
Okay, you're talking about the surface watershed,
Oh, thank
not
you.
the ground watershed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
If I could just interject, conditional use permit ordinance due to Act 67. In November 2017, Act 67 was signed into law. The act creates 2 requirements for conditional use conditions. A condition, whether appearing in an ordinance or sought to be imposed as a condition of a particular application, must be reasonable and to the extent practicable measurable. The act also requires that conditions be based on substantial evidence and that conditional use permits be granted if an applicant agrees to meet the local conditions. That being said, thankfully we have the zoning, like we stated at the last meetings. Thankfully we have the zoning. The document that is the application process that has been submitted by Cooley Frac Sand is the wish list. We, as the town board, as the zoning, and as the ad hoc committee, impact committee, to get the recommendations, sit down, put them in written form, submit them to Cooley Frac Sand, and hopefully they will abide, or concessions back and forth.
Have you done that already, or
That's,
is there something
that has not happened yet. That is why the meetings will start with the ad hoc committee September 5th, 7 p.m.
We had the meetings at the informational meeting at our last towns meeting. We had another informational meeting Tuesday night. We had it posted, the email blast. That's how everyone I'm sure was here. We had the tour of the mine site. 18 people showed, 16 that weren't. We had 2 board members and a zoning commissioner that also went and toured the mine site. So that is where it stands at this point. This, like, once again, the informational portion. This is where we get the information, not hearsay, not from the corner, not from someone walking up and going, "Did you hear?" This is your panel of experts. Please utilize them this evening.
So what is your evaluation of this project to our community?
This project is not analyzed in part of that. We are looking at the industry as a whole. So what you would do is you would go through that document and pick out those that pertain to your economy and utilize that information.
I have a question. The DNRs are all for the water and the air and all this and our land and all that. What about our wildlife? We have a lot of wildlife out here and a lot of it is on that area. Who's going to protect them?
Good question. So the strategic analysis also has a section on wildlife impacts, ecological landscape impacts, and there's a lot of resiliency that exists out there with regards to wildlife. Now, obviously, we have regulations for threatened and endangered species, and we have a set of criteria for avoidance, minimization, and mitigation for any impacts to those wildlife measures. Ecological landscapes are looked at as part of the process, and for the most part, the industry as a whole does see a shift or a change, but it's not necessarily a bad one. It's just different. Deer will be displaced.
So basically, the wildlife. So basically, the wildlife that people look forward to seeing out here. I mean, we have lots of deer, we have lots of babies.
They'll still be around.
But otherwise, what you're saying is basically they'll adapt by leaving. Right. Finding a different place to go.
They'll find a different place to go, but they're not going to leave the county. They're not going to leave the township. They're just going to find a different.
Because I mean, I know a lot of people deer hunt, but I know there's also people that are wildlife watchers. I mean, we have a lot of turkeys. We have bear, and I mean,
it'll change. And one of the things that we also see when we see grassland or farmlands change over into non-metallic mining, we see different types of wildlife. Maybe you won't see orioles, but maybe you'll see sandpipers. Okay, so it'll be a different ecology, it's a change is what we see.
Well, and we tried to get, we tried to be as creative as we could with the reclamation, and we worked for companies, and I gotta say, Cooley and Carbo, they did not hesitate 1 second to keep the entire deciduous, what is that, a 20 or 40, in addition to all the pines along County V. And I'd like to think, being an outdoorsman, turkey hunter, duck hunter, now you know where the design came from. You're going to have, this is going to be better duck habitat than I've seen anywhere in well, help me, Tracy. You got good duck habitat?
15 years.
Well, we didn't build out here to have that in our
We have
backyard.
to maintain, please, maintain some decorum here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I live a mile down the road, not quite a mile from where you'll be going. And I've been out here since 1970, and I got good water and good air. And and of course we have deer and things, but I really want to protect my water and the air. That's very important. That's why we live out here. So that's really important. And am I going to have my water? If you start pumping above me, am I going to have water coming down to me? Right now, in the wintertime, we leave a hose running the pond to keep the fish alive. Am I going to be able to do that next year or this winter? Or aren't they going to have enough water? I've always had plenty of water. We've been there since 1970, and we haven't had a problem. And I'm still on a dirt road. Got a little wider, and I got more gravel this year than ever.
If I could, I got for Ms. Walls a couple questions, actually several, but I'll stick to 2 or 3. more global questions. Number one, understanding that Cooley Frac Sand is a relatively new company. I think they've had one other mine. Is that a fair statement in Wood County? One other mine, and this will be their second mine experience. Has the DNR had any infractions or citations issued to them with the Cooley Frac Sand Company?
I'm not placing it off the top of my head. I can go back into our records and see if they are listed.
Okay, that would be helpful. A second question, you mentioned limestone mining. Is there a concern, to your question about air, is there a concern related to silica with limestone mining versus sand mining?
It's no different.
No different.
Right.
Okay.
Because they have to employ practices for dust control, and that comes for not only their stockpiles, their roads, but also for their equipment that they're using.
Okay, and even a more global final question from me. What you kind of characterized, or you mentioned that the legislation has changed significantly as far as essentially the enforcement authority by the DNR for frac sand mining specifically. Would you say, or would you characterize that enforcement change to be greater than or less than what it used to be?
I don't see a change in enforcement. We have always had the same authorities under enforcement as we always have. We have a much greater push to work with companies, with permitted entities to maintain and keep compliance.
Okay, I guess I shouldn't have used enforcement. Greater oversight.
Yeah.
So there is less oversight or greater oversight than before?
I would have to say greater because we now have staff members that are exclusive to industrial sand mining rather than having that be just a portion of their job duties.
Thank you.
For the possible WDNR, if you see some sort of violation or enforcement action, how long is it open? And back to James's question, do they stop operations until it's fixed?
Very good questions. Thank you. So the length of time for an enforcement action to remain open is dependent on the degree of the compliance issues. Something that is a record-keeping issue may just be cleared up in just a matter of a few weeks. Okay. Something that is more egregious, like an infrastructure problem, may take up to a year. Like the one case that was the $200,000 one, that was actually a 2-year process that was open for. So it depends on how long it takes for them to get back into compliance. Depends on how long that enforcement case remains open for. To your other question with regards to operations, DNR has very limited authorities with regards to shutting down an operation. We have to go through DOJ. So if we have a notice of violation or a notice of noncompliance, if we want to shut that operation down, we have to refer it to DOJ, and we have to ask DOJ to issue the order. DNR doesn't have that authority. The local level has much greater authority with regards to stop operations than DNR has.
Can we set, as a town, can we set, if through the permit, the limits? Just as an example, if we have a non-conformance and it's not being complied with, can we as a town say they have to be complied within 30 days or you're shut down? Or it escalates quicker? Can we as a town decide that?
I would have to say that the township would have to get together with their council and refer to that Act 67 to see what your authorities are.
That's what we're, as a town, as an ad hoc committee, as zoning, that's what we are checking into. That's the best thing. I mean, right now, I mean that's because due to the fact that because we are zoned and because we do have the conditional use permits, we can regulate and we can put stipulations in the permit when it is issued, stating infractions, hours of operation, number of loads.
Okay.
That's all able to be built into this.
That's what I was looking for. I didn't know if we could dictate that as
we can.
a
Yes,
as a town.
the town is able to draft. Yes, the condition.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Hi, I have a question about flocculants as it relates to groundwater contamination. Is Cooley going to be using polyacrylides in their sand washing process?
So I don't know what they're proposing on the way of flocculant use.
It's likely that that will be used,
During the
especially,
sand washing process.
absolutely,
Okay, because
especially
I
if it's
asked
a,
that because on Tuesday, he asked if there was gonna be any flocculants used, and he said only in the remediation process. So
right,
is that-
no, that's true, in the
He
operations.
said only in the remediation.
That's true,
process.
that's true.
Okay.
Yeah, same thing.
But,
When
okay,
you wash sand, basically when you wash sand, it's got some level of silt and clay in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're trying to remove that. That's the whole, what you're trying to do is remove that before you remove the wet sand from the property.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're washing the sand, you generate a lot of muddy water. And when that muddy water goes back into the excavation, it's oftentimes beneficial to use a flocculant to make all the little small silt and clay particles get to the point where they go to the bottom because they all go together. That's what a flocculant does.
so the reclamation, so those flocculants are going to be kept on that site.
Yes,
So they will break down.
No.
yes, oh, absolutely.
Polyacrylamides do not.
They're metal.
They biodegrade.
They biodegrade into.
Very slowly. There is a USDA research study that has been done on polyacrylamide use in farming practices in arid areas because of the need to retain water. They did a 5-year study and found that polyacrylamides do not migrate through the soils, that they do not readily biodegrade, at least not in the 5-year study that they had conducted, and it stays within the top 6 inches of the soil where it was applied. On that note, the DNR has taken note of
But I
other
read that it
studies.
does not bind to soil and so it seeps down pretty far.
You're thinking of the acrylamide monomer.
Okay.
And that
That's
is a
different from the-
residual component that is
That's the
present.
breakdown of the poly.
Nope, it's a residual
Please.
component as the manufacturing process of polyacrylamides. Now, the Department of Natural Resources, when reviewing a proposal for the use of polyacrylamides, will take a look at that residual acrylamide level as part of the toxicity evaluation. The vast majority of industrial sand mines that are using polyacrylamides are using one that is approved by the NSF Foundation, that is the National Sanitation Foundation. They're the only ones that set any type of standard for acrylamides in drinking water. And at that level, we're going to see the lowest amount of residual acrylamide that we possibly can have. And when we take a look at that, when we evaluate that amount of residual acrylamide present, we evaluate the level that becomes toxic in the environment. And the first thing that we do under our use restriction is to cut that number right in half. So whatever number that level of toxicity citing in the environment is found to be, we take it and say you can use an amount equal to less than half of that. But then we're going to take that value and we're going to run a calculation based off of the application rate. And whatever number that comes back at, we're going to cut that by an additional 20%. So we're looking for that residual acrylamide value to be exceedingly low. And that's what we have our approvals for acrylamide use, or really any chemical use anywhere with regards to water treatment. Now I'd like to add a little bit more to that. There's been another study out there on polyacrylamide use and residual monomers. The UW River Falls, Dr. Holly Dolliver has done a study on reclamation where she studied the muds coming from the processed wash waters going back into reclamation. She was looking at it from a beneficial reuse standpoint of view to see how well she could see reclamation occur with these muds in place. But she was also evaluating the groundwater levels or groundwater contaminants, and she was looking specifically for polyacrylamides and acrylamides and has found none. Additionally, sand mine companies recently, you've probably seen it in the news where a large release was made. That company had, under their conditional use permit, been required to monitor for polyacrylamides, not only in the materials that they were washing, but in the muds that they removed from the ponds. And all of the results that they came back with had been non-detected. The DNR went and did samples of the material that was released in the water. and we did not detect any acrylamides. They went and sampled the material that was left on the side of the embankments where that material was deposited. Also found non-detected on polyacrylamides or acrylamides. So I think from the standpoint of view that this material or these flocculants that are being used, they have a very strong affinity for solid material. They're not readily dissolvable. Any residual acrylamides that might be present are going to biodegrade so fast that it will become completely inert in the environment. This is information that the DNR has been collecting. We don't have a formalized report on it, but Dr. Dolliver is a good resource, and you can always ask for test results that DNR did on recent.
You feel like it's been studied sufficiently?
There's always a good measure of information that could be learned about it.
Like
but I think,
long-term effects?
right, like for the long-term reclamation, what kind of biodegradation do we see after maybe a 5-year period of time? What is the potential for it to move? We can always learn more information about it, but we have enough information now that shows that we have a reasonable level of confidence for that use.
I'm going to follow up with that release you were talking about in May, I believe it was.
Yep.
One of the things I read is that they did not, because of the zoning, you were talking about getting to a different zoning thing to get around regulations. Well, apparently they weren't required to have a secondary pond to dump that into when they had to release it, and that's why they released the stuff into the river, directly into there. Is that happening here? Is this stuff that's stored on site at this mine going to be in a pond or a pool or like that, this wash water residual stuff?
So keep in mind that this pond was breached purposely to save life.
Exactly. But they had nowhere to put it except out into the river.
This mine will be totally different. There's
Yeah.
no
Right.
similarity between that and
So
this.
when they
That
wash this,
circumstance,
when this sand is washed, where does that wash water go?
Well, from the very beginning, the site's going to be below 1200, okay? So there will be always storage under the 1200, which is the lowest point on site to contain a 500-year flood. Yeah, it's going to be impossible for anything to get breached out here. That's step one, is to dig a pond down to 1175. So there'll be a 25-foot deep pond that is the size of a football field.
And any flocculants that are in there don't want to migrate, you're saying, because they attract to solids and just want to
Right, in fact, it's going to add even more. We're going to go down to the top of the Eau Claire, which is a shale with the permeability of this table, and then literally the first day they flock, if they do flock, that's not a given yet. You don't have to do it all the time, but we're trying to save water. So the whole reason, there's only one reason to flock, and that's to reuse the water that you put into the clarifier to wash the sand in the beginning. There's no other reason to use a flocculant, and that's why it's being used. It's been used since the 50s in most wastewater treatment plants in the United States use.
And drinking water.
And drinking water. And
basically to get more clean water to wash more sand.
Yes, yes. If you're not disposing of dirty water in a big pit, then you don't need, if you do that, then you need to use every gallon that you're not reusing, you need to use good, fresh, clean water. So flocculants are actually a good thing. They really are, in my opinion. I'm not an expert, but I've been studying acrylamides for over 10 years.
Mr. Dustman, so that a depth is going to be dug, and that's the water I'm drawing from out of that aquifer. I'm half-mile from the property. So.
Yep, out of the Wani Walk, okay? Not the Eau Claire, the Wani Walk. The upper 25 feet.
The Eau Claire, which...
No, we are not touching the Eau Claire.
Okay. All right.
How many years is this mine expected to run? Do we know?
At this point, it is projected for 15 years.
Can they change that?
15 years, 10, they can change that up, 10, and that's due to the fact that they have set it up, and it's all, like I stated, this is all at the last meeting. I'll reiterate a little bit. Possible 15-year plan, 10 acres at a time. 10 acres, dig, 10 acres, reclaim, dig, in sections, 10 acres, versus opening up 120 acres, let's go gangbusters, let's get it done, it is in stages, which is a more manageable situation. That's when the DNR and the county and all the regulations come into play so that they can monitor each one of these sections. It's all been spelled out in the initial plans.
Between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m.
And who monitors the noise level and the lights that are used in that area? Is it state and county?
No, it's all local.
All local. And do we have a noise ordinance in this town of Rock?
The town of Rock follows the county's noise ordinance, 90 decibels. The state's level, 90 decibels. That's 90, exactly. 90 decibels is loud. That is the allowable. The mines that are all, most sand mine operations are in the 60 to 70 range.
Where, at the site or a mile from the site?
At the site.
That's still loud.
As the people that attended the other night can attest, when they went into the mines, when they went into the sand, right to it, they were electric motors. Did you need earplugs? Were you able to hold conversations? Did you have to have respirators? Did you need earplugs?
But it was
The biggest noise generation that I've experienced out on a mine site usually comes from the crusher unit, and that's not much. Most of the sandstone, even if it is consolidated and they might have to blast, it breaks apart very easily. So a limestone quarry is going to be a lot louder than a sandstone
Are
quarry.
you including that as truck traffic?
Oh, no.
Truck traffic. And how, that's
Yeah,
all day long, truck
Right
traffic.
now, they're looking at the increase of truck traffic would be on Highway V, which is the Highway V to Highway 10. The amount of truck traffic depends upon the season and the amount that they're pulling out. The noise from the truck traffic, can all be, we can't, as a township, we can't say your truck is too loud. You can't. It's the county sheriffs can come up and say your muffler's too loud, but we as a township can't say your muffler's too loud. You have to recognize that.
Who's looking out for our quality of life? My husband and I just bought the property to the west of it 10 days ago. And we were not told about this when we were going to buy this property. Now, our property that we were going to retire on is going to have all this noise for 15 years.
Yeah. Working on it.
Hey, I'm hoping I don't lose my well.
The conditional use permit, the plan has berms all the way around which are designed to deaden the sound, make it lighter.
Would you
make it
want to
not-
live right there?
I have 5 pits within 1 mile of my house, ma'am. Thank you.
Than a mile.
So
This is
this is-
200 feet.
So just this is why we've appointed the ad hoc committee and for the zoning to follow, get your recommendations. This is where it needs to be, is the recommendations. Once again, we have the industry experts here. They can give us the answers that we need at this point. Bring your questions, because right now, like I said, the conditional use permit is an application.
Why wasn't this announced any earlier? The first time I heard of it was when it was hanging on my door last night for this meeting. You said you had been in that meeting. How come we haven't-
Because it's all been posted on the town's website, and posted with every agenda.
I don't go on the town website.
It's posted with every agenda for the town board meeting for the past 3 months.
She's first.
I got one question. Who pays for the quality of life that they lose around the pit? When their mom pulls out on the road or somebody's kids getting on the bus because we got more trucks. They can talk about the water problems, but then we're 15 years down the road. Then who's gonna pay for it?
Can I, to be fair, the permit qualifies, they won't be trucking when the school buses are there and when they're coming back with the kids. There is like an hour window there that they've allowed for. But to answer the question there, to address the question there, we as a committee have been tasked with complying with this zoning ordinance, the Town of Rock zoning ordinance, period. And the purpose of that zoning ordinance is to promote the health, safety, aesthetics, comfort, prosperity, and general welfare of the Town of Rock. So the recommendation and we as a committee anticipate are going to be consistent with that.
Do they have to notify anybody that if they're going to blast? Do they have to notify you or anybody?
Blasting falls under Department of Safety and Professional Services, so whatever those requirements are for blasting, I know that there is a series of procedures that most mines that blast follow with regards to that.
I'd like to just comment about the notification. Chairman Wintersdorfer is correct, as far as the notification, it's been in the normal route of delivery of information. The information many of you probably received on your door, there were two efforts going around. There was an effort by a concerned citizens group that provided little documents on the door that identified their opinion about the mine and also to a notification of this meeting. There was another effort done by our committee to start notifying people of just this meeting only. No opinions, we're staying objective as we possibly can to get the information so we can make fact-based recommendations to the zoning commission. So that's the process that's taken place thus far, and how you receive the notifications on your door and that type of thing. They basically, the citizens, concerned citizens started on the northwest and moved to the east and south, and we as a committee had a minimal number of flyers, but a bunch, and we started basically on the east side and moved this way. Didn't get everybody, but we made an attempt to do exactly that because there were many people in the town that expressed that concern about notification about what's about to potentially occur in the town.
I was wondering, for John Dustman, you're working on the reclamation and the fact that it's being done in stages, 10 acres at a time. Briefly, what is your vision for as each stage is finished? What is it going to look like? That deer stand that you mentioned, that's on my husband and my property. So we are right there. So I'm wondering, what is it going to look like in those stages for the next 15 years?
Yeah, so the idea is to promote a lot of open water. We're hoping to have a 20-foot deep lake in the middle. We've designed it to be 10-to-1 slopes near the shore, so it's not only safe for kids who want to go out, they're not going to drop right into the water. It'll be 10-to-1, I believe out 75 feet. But that also promotes a lot of the good wetland vegetation that you want to serve not only as filtration, but also food and habitat for critters that like wetlands. Certainly, we hope that it'll be stocked. It'll be fish. Obviously, at 20 feet deep, it'll support a fish population, and then obviously support the diving ducks that probably don't have a lot of habitat around here. So it'll be duck, geese habitat. We're experienced in doing that. I've done a lot of work with the University of Minnesota's Landscape Architecture department, doing reclamation of like this point up in the Iron Range of Minnesota. And so designing islands is always a good thing. For the fishermen, we're going to put structure on the bottom of the lake to promote good fish habitat. So it really is all about habitat.
And who's going to own the property?
I don't have that answer.
At this point, it has been proposed that at the completion of everything, the property would be deeded back to the town with the stipulation that the company has decided to, with everything gets finished, that they would establish a 501c3, thank you, yes, which would then be deeded back to the town. That money, that fund would be strictly for the utilization, for the upkeep of the property, whether it be a wildlife habitat, park, campground, anything, whichever it is designed as, so that it would not be a detriment to the town, so that it wouldn't cost the town money due to the fact that that fund would be there. It would also take care of the possible tax base that is there.
Considering the company is still intact at that point in time.
That's, it has to be established as it's in the process. They can't just say we're going to do it in 15 years it started. It has to be every time that it's there. That's established and that's followed through.
Do we have a contract, or will we have a contract, and do we have some sort of legal representation in this?
We have the condition, the contract would be the conditional use permit. That's the contract. Legal representation, at this point, the township has not secured due to the fact that we have a number of things we need to go through to find for as far as legal representation. We've been in contact. I have been in contact numerous times with the Wisconsin Towns Association. They are and the attorneys, they are advisory only. So every question that I fire to them, they've been answering. But yes, there is, to answer that question, at this point, the town has not secured any legal representation.
Can we hire an attorney that would serve on our behalf to stop the project?
That needs to be decided at the town board level. Yes, that needs to be decided at the town board level.
I have a question about air quality. And interestingly enough, on WPR radio this morning from 6 to 7, they had frac sand mining on. And it's been around, what, 15 years, 18 years
Actually,
approximately?
it's been around for approximately
But in Wisconsin.
75 years.
But in Wisconsin.
Right, in Wisconsin,
Right.
75 years.
And so, going off of what they had on there, a couple different people, one financial, one a researcher from UW Stout, okay, out of Menominee. He wrote a book on this. And of course, so if we're looking at research about, 2000 till now, is about the life of what this mine will be, 15 years, right? And the research really, for like the particles, isn't really there yet, because you have to have sample after sample after sample. I mean, if you look at like what a medication has to go through the FDA, it needs to be tested. 15 years is a really short time. So we're going off a lot of guesstimates on early research at this point. And so what my question is that you showed up there where they had the level when they're looking at PM10 and PM.2.5, and then where the mines that you were looking at were way down here. Who sets that level? And is that level based on anything that has to do with frac sand mining? Because that's a DNR level for air quality. But how much is that related to frac sand mining air quality?
Well, those apply to frac sand mines as well as sandblasting operations, as they apply to glass making industries. Okay, so if they meet the criteria for monitoring, then they will have to meet what the standard set for that particular activity and that particular level of operation.
But that standard has been set from past research that the frac sand mine hasn't come in yet.
And that is consistent with the federal requirement, and that's for PM10. And so that is established through the EPA, and DNR has to take a look at what the ambient air quality of the state of Wisconsin is and its contributing members in order to determine whether or not the federal level is appropriate for the state of Wisconsin or not. So DNR does evaluate the standards for the state of Wisconsin. And for PM10, the 150 is appropriate for the state, so we stayed with the federal level on that one. I was thinking, so with regards to the data that's on the website, Wisconsin Profits has only been around since 2015 or so. There are other monitors that have been in operation since 2012, so there is a little bit longer data set out there. But we have had industrial sand mining in the state of Wisconsin for closer to 75 years. So as soon as the Clean Air Act hit the books, DNR was regulating the industry.
I was wondering about some clarification for that too, because you said so DNR monitors PM10.
Mm-hmm.
What about the PM 2.5, which is way more negatively impacts human health because it gets farther into the lung cavity? So did DNR does not monitor at all PM 2.5?
DNR has monitors around the state.
Mm-hmm.
We do not require it at industrial sand mines for two reasons. One, sand mines are conducting a mechanical process. Even blasting is considered a mechanical process. Crushing is a mechanical process. Washing, drying, all of that is a mechanical process. PM 2.5 is a generated pollutant from combustion sources. So we do regulate PM 2.5, but more from an operational perspective rather than from a technical standard
So
perspective.
when the miners have their little monitors, they're monitoring for 2.5 or for 10?
They're actually monitoring for 2.5 because MSHA requires it, mine safety.
Because are you aware of the study done by Professor Eau Claire about 2.5 ambient air particles traveling 3 miles in a 3-mile radius, depending on, you know, obviously wind and terrain and things like that, and that greatly impacts human health?
Yes, we have, in our strategic analysis, evaluated several different studies that are out there. I believe you are referring to Dr. Kristen Pierce's studies. We also have information from the University of Iowa, Dr. John Richards from the industry's perspective. So there's a great deal of information out there. I highly recommend that you take a look at what the AIR program has provided as far as analysis of each of those projects.
I mean, he suggests that there needs to be way more body of work as far as human health impacts to ambient air.
So I'm not going to get
Did I
into
feel
too
that
much.
one?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, if I can be of any value to the committee or you guys moving forward, again, it's just, you know, 25 or 30 years of amassing an opinion about the way mining is done, and really it's not mining, agriculture. In this case, I just look at the information, and being a scientist, I try to take all the data in and then evaluate risk. And the fact that there is no dry plant here, it greatly, I mean, if you have
Are
a
there
risk...
any studies, I wanted to ask that too, to compare wet plants and dry plants and air quality?
Yes, absolutely. Every site that has an air monitor, they put it by the dry plant. And here's why. And this is, man, you just kind of proved my point here. The sand doesn't have any newly fractured crystalline quartz in it. The things that can make you sick from silicosis do not exist in this sand deposit. And I wasn't taking everybody's word for it. That's what the that's what the Wisconsin Geological Survey said. I spent about $250,000 and made a lab. I have a sand lab in St. Paul, and we have 4 people now that every day do nothing but forensically look at frac sand. I personally went over to another forensic lab, and we took all kinds of dust from our lab. I'm obviously concerned because I don't want my staff to breathe that dust every day. So we took it over to another kind of Dick Tracy lab that went down and did X-ray diffraction on it, and so they can actually tell every mineral that's in the dust. There was no silica. There were no newly fractured crystalline silica in that material.
It's kind of interesting. We've received a number of complaints with regards to dust off of piles and stuff. And to be sure, if you can see it blowing, it's too big to get in your lungs.
Right.
It's just too big.
That's why the 2.5 is up.
Well, right. If
Yeah.
you can't see it, you're scared of it. I get it. I get it. But the material isn't in. There is none of that in the material that they're mining, and then it's never going to be dry.
It's not
Ever.
in the material here or
Right.
in any frac sand mine?
It's not in any frac sand mine.
No,
No.
it's there.
No.
It's just not there in levels that would be. It's there. It's just not there in levels that would be of health concern.
Well, again, let
That
me
goes against
let me be
studies
clear.
from
Let me be
over
clear. It's got to be newly
Right?
fractured crystalline
Take a look
quartz.
at our strategic analysis.
But, however, you have to remember, we are concerned about this mine, not, I mean, we are gathering information. You cannot base a decision on something that is read. Okay, I mean, that's happening, you know, over here, that they're coming. This is for this specific.
This is why it's important. I mean,
Absolutely.
There's silica dust, and, you know, I mean, yeah, this is important.
Absolutely. So, like I said, I didn't mean to interject here, but let them explain instead of continually rifling questions as they're explaining. Let them.
This is why we are concerned, because here's school forest in our backyard. Nasonville Dairy, Nasonville School
Right. And Grace Lutheran Church is within miles of this place. If you drive on Highway 10 and come down on Highway V, it is gorgeous. You see the soybean fields, you see the corn tossling, you see the Christmas trees. We know nothing else than that. And that is why we built out here.
Right.
That is why we have hundreds of acres out here.
Right.
And we want it because we love it. And we want the peace, the quiet. We want to hear the cardinals.
And some people went to the military to get this land. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Vensky.
Okay, we've been talking a lot about pollutants. We've been talking about, there's been comments about light, there's been comments about noise, pollution, light pollution, all this kind of stuff. Now, I was on this tour down to a mine on 95 past Maryland. It's not a big mine, it's like, I think a 40-acre plot, if I'm correct. I don't know how much has been mined out of it. I'm going to guesstimate maybe half or 3/4 of it. And I can tell you the noise. There was probably 4, maybe 5 different elevators, conveyors running. And honestly, to be right truthful, it's noisier in this room than standing under those elevators. And I think that anybody that was on that tour would vouch for that. As far as the reclamation, what about reclamation? This mine is reclaiming as they are going. We are standing on one side of this lake. The machines are running right behind my back, no more than on the other edge of the town hall property. And you look across that lake, there's campers all the way around. Now you look over to this side, there's campers all the way around. Can those campers use this lake? Not at this time, because it's fenced off. But it is being reclaimed, and as soon as this lake is, or as soon as this land is reclaimed, these fences are all coming down and it'll be open to the public. And they were saying up there that the grade off the shore, it's not a 20-foot drop. It's a sand beach going off the shore. It's a toddler wading pool going off the shore, which is no different than Sherwood Park, Dexter Park, Richfield. You've got more pollution and stuff in Richfield. Every year they're closing Richfield at some point because of pollution.
Yeah, well, I don't
You
think,
talk
I don't
about-
think you're not living over there.
You talk about the dust, there's more dust coming off on these farms, these mega farms. I mean, you can't call them mega farms here because they don't have 5,000 head of cattle, but these farms are turning 4 farms into one field. Now, you telling me that these, and I grew up on a farm, I lived on a farm, I ate the farm dust just like everybody else in this room. But if you're talking about dust pollution, go out and round in the spring of the year or in the fall of the year when it's dry. And these guys are out there working these 100-acre fields and see the pollution off in the fields there. I mean, the pollution, when we were down there, it was in the evening, the conveyors were running. There was no actual mining of the sand while we were there, but I think that that's something that a lot of us are getting more concerned about than what's really need to be. As far as the future, who can predict the future? I mean, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, I went to a meeting, and it was when atrazine first came out. It was the very first year atrazine came out. They were doing a seminar, and I was real interested in atrazine because that kills every weed there is, and other stuff. And the guy said, this stuff is absolutely safe. I'll prove it to you. and he took a tablespoon of that atrazine, put it in a glass of water, stirred it up and drank it. What happened to him? I have no idea. But anybody that's been in this neighborhood, whether you just moved out here, which we welcome you into the neighborhood, but you're also gonna have to expect that this mine, and this is just my own personal opinion, and it's gonna be operating 365 days out of the year. But this mine is probably gonna produce less dust than some of the large farms in the area.
But it's going to do it 365 days a year.
That's
not true.
Keep in mind that dust is regulated by the DNR, and if you have, or if the mine does have a dust problem, you call us, and we'll be out there.
But the dust you can't see.
Jim?
You mentioned earlier that there are certain characteristics that you have control over the mining operation, and there's other characteristics that the local township has control over. Is there an opportunity for the townships to have regulations greater than what is required by the state of Wisconsin, generally speaking?
That I really couldn't answer for you.
Well, say water requirements or noise requirements, lighting requirements, property evaluation.
There are probably a number of township ordinances that you can research and see what others have done. In those, you will probably find some instances where ambient air quality standards might be more restricted, for instance. But keep in mind, if you do choose to go more restrictive, make sure that you have the sound science behind it, because if it's not a state standard and you have to enforce it, DNR won't be there to help you out.
Yeah, okay, so for 15 years, what is the monetary exchange that's gonna happen between this mining company and the town of Rock to help my taxes out?
Because my decrease in property
Because
value.
our property values are gonna go down. That's no question about it. But I wanna know what's there to protect us from the town.
Zoning, conditional use, recommendations. I can't give you that answer. I wish I could. I wish I could tell you that tomorrow I'm going to be able to put X amount of dollars in your pocket. I wish I could say that about me, but we don't know. That's where, thankfully, like I stated, the town has zoning, and we are able to put conditions on the use of the property.
Can one of the conditions be that the company that's mining provide us with the loss in property value for the
There
next
has been instances, yes, where those conditions have been put into effect through other property. The town of Rock is not the only township in the state, as you know, that is facing this issue. And there are many conditional use permits out there for different townships, different counties, all over. That's what the task force, the ad hoc committee has been tasked with. That's what we're trying to compile as much as possible.
Could you, or maybe one of the panel, identify the amount of tonnage they anticipate mining off this property? And that, because that relates to this gentleman's question about what monetary benefit could we get as a township, to be fair. Anybody have any idea how many tons?
Who's here?
Oh,
Yeah, we plan to take about 10 million tons off the property.
10 million tons. And then, is there a monetary compensation level identified at all by the township or the Cooley Frac sand?
No.
Nothing.
Is there an amount paid to the county for hauling the sand?
No.
Nothing identified in the contract? Okay, thank you.
Does the mining company pay commercial property taxes to the township? What is their taxes that they're paying on this land?
That I do not know. That is a question for the county treasurer, but we will get that answer. That for the absolutely.
Cooley Frac sand does not own the property. It's currently owned by Mr.
Carbo
Ferguson,
Ceramics.
Mr. Francine, and Carbo Ceramics.
Correct.
Carbo Ceramics owns the bulk of that property, but it is not even owned by
Correct.
Cooley Frac sand.
And they currently
Carbo Ceramics purchased the Roger Hansen property a number of years ago. They are now in negotiations with, Cooley Frac Sand is in negotiations with John Francine and with the Helgersons, with Don Helgerson, in order to secure some properties. So that is private person selling to another industry, or selling to that's you selling to you. That's the township has no regulation on that. Ma'am, you had your hand up a number of times.
So as legislation changes over the course of the next 15 years, as science gets better and regulation gets better, will they be expected to meet the new levels of regulation, or will they be grandfathered in?
Every time a permit is up for reissuance, any changes to the legislation will be employed at that reissuance time frame. Those permits last about 5 years.
How does the townships determine, or the rules that we come up with in this block, for this mining, how does that work with the state? Does that supersede the state in this little area? Or does the state have control?
It's hard to say because some of the regulations at the township level have no authority at the state level to begin with. But, anything that crosses over, the department generally takes authority on most circumstances. If there's a separate regulatory authority, like with air, like if we have a requirement for air and the town comes up with their own requirement for air, they're mutually exclusive. One doesn't usurp the other.
We're going to allow 2 more questions. People are starting to, so we're going to allow 2 more questions at this point, and then we will start convening the meeting.
I couldn't make it to the meeting when you took the bus tour. So my sister and I drove out to Maryland yesterday. And I just want to say, it was noisy. And I think you are misleading
Shut the door,
people
please.
because those campers are ATVers. It's not a regular campground, it's an ATV campground. Those people make a lot of noise, they don't care about the noise. It's not a regular campground out there.
And do you think anybody could ever go back and build a house there? Yeah, you have a house there
I got
right
40
now.
acres right
But
next
do you
to
think that would still be feasible for somebody to build on the land after it's done? And it won't support life because you took away the life out of it.
Yeah, no topsoil.
That's where the reclamation plan comes. That's where the reclamation plan comes into effect.
Whose decision is it? The township or the rock people or fuel or the people?
Yes.
I know of an individual that owns a gravel pit.
Please keep
a mining
the side
pit in
conversation
Minnesota.
down, please. Thank
They
you.
mined out of there all the black dirt they wanted to mine and whatever else they were mining out of it. They made a lake out of it. They sold the property around the lake more than what the property values were before. So keep that in mind. The long term of this is we're going to have something that's an asset. It's going to be worth something to the community. And it's going to, the property values around the lake are going to be worth more, actually. You may not see that now.
Darcy, didn't you hear what we were all saying? We don't want a campsite. We don't want a campground.
It don't have to be a campground, so whatever you guys decide.
I don't want what was there,
It
because that was
does not-
horrible.
And that is why. That is why the final plan, the final drafting, will be after everything is said and done. It's like I stated. Right now, we don't know if it's going to be duck hunting. We don't know if it's going to be a lake. We don't know if it's going to be bringing 6,000, 65,000 yards of black dirt and put it back into farm field. We don't know. That is why we have all of these people here working on the plan when the plans are submitted. Allow 1 more question.
This is for the county, Mr. Hawk. Highway V has some pretty big hills on it, so that's outside of the township purview. Some people are concerned about Jake brakes being used. How would we approach that with the county?
It's a good question because that's coming up in our highway committee meeting next week. I worked with the sheriff's department on a separate location in Wood County that's been requested. Typically, Jake brake is a local ordinance. It's usually it's a noise ordinance. Some townships do not want to pass a noise ordinance for a specific location. And in the past, the county's basically been saying, unless the ordinance is passed, they won't install a sign. I've been working with the sheriff's department for the last couple of months on this because we have a location where township does not want to pass an ordinance, but yet there is really a need for a Jake brake sign. So we worked with the sheriff's department. There is authority under certain laws that the sheriff's department can enforce. And what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate that location and find a proper way to put in a Jake brake sign. So if that became an issue up there, that would be a possibility. And I'll tell you this now, I was out there one day, I was meeting with these folks, and there were several trucks that came down that hill already, and they were applying their Jake brake. It's not uncommon, and it's not something that the sheriff's department is going to take lightly. If the sign goes up, they will enforce it. Unfortunately, a lot of that is local folks who live right here. So, when we put that sign up, it's up, and it's going to be your neighbors and friends who are going to get citations. So that's something you got to think about, and that would be something I would work with the town to make sure they're aware of that too, so that those folks that are driving there know what's coming.
Is there also potential for like a staggered speed sign? I'm older, we used to have different daytime speeds and nighttime speeds for different road conditions, for example.
Currently we don't have separate speed limits for day and night. If the traffic became an issue, we'd evaluate that and we'd take into consideration what happens at that time. I'll tell you real quickly, I was impressed the day I met these folks because one of the concerns I had was dragging dust and mud and so on out on the road at this location, knowing it's coming out of a site that would generally, create that. They've already thought this out. They're looking at creating a hard surface, having these trucks turn enough times before they actually leave the site that will actually break loose any dirt and sand and mud from those tires, so it's not being drug out on the highway. That's one of my big concerns, because I can tell you right now, it's an unsafe condition when you have a lot of fines and mud and silt and stuff like that drug out on the highway, where a car that comes along is used to driving on dry pavement all of a sudden hits this stuff and they can slide off the road quickly. And like that gentleman back there said, there's more farmers depositing mud and manure and that on our highways today than this site will produce. So obviously they've seen enough other sites that they know what will work to help keep that material on their site, and that's what they're trying to do. And the location of their driveway, we talked about that. It's in a location that is actually at the bottom of a hill at a spot where oncoming traffic in both directions can see where it's at, trucks entering and exiting. So we've talked a lot about that truck traffic. And the other thing that impressed me about them were they're not looking to haul primarily with quad axle trucks, they're looking at hauling with larger trucks. So it's fewer trips in and out. So you're gonna have fewer trucks than if you were hauling with quad axle trucks. So I don't want to speculate what's going to happen there just yet, because what everybody's starting to think about is, there's going to be a tremendous amount of trucks out there running 24/7. I'm not envisioning that. And I think what you're going to find out is they're going to be good neighbors, and I've already heard them talk about not hauling during the morning hours when school buses are picking up kids in the afternoon when they're dropping them off. That would be a concern for me as well. But if they're already looking to specific times of not hauling, I think they're going to be good neighbors as far as when they are hauling, what they will be doing. But we'll monitor that site and see what happens.
I had a question for you real quick if I can.
Yep,
With
yep,
the
last question,
consideration
thank
of, on V there, I know you say they're gonna be you're in the process of making some improvements to the road or whatever like that, but I'm just wondering, where are they going to be entering and where are they gonna be exiting? Because I know there used to be a trailer on top of the hill, right off of V when you're coming down, there's, not right on the hill, right on the hill across from Zerach, is it?
Well,
Log cabin, there's like a little, it was a driveway one time. I'm just wondering, are they gonna be coming in on hills and going in it, you know, what? I'm just concerned about the safety on V.
The exact location, it will be determined with our staff. But what they pointed out where they'd like to is actually south of MacArthur, what was it, 800 feet? So it's in a spot that's actually got good visibility from all directions. And that's one of our concerns, because if you do have a truck pulling in and out of there, you want to be able to see that well in advance. You also want to know when that truck comes out of there that it's moving a little slower than most traffic, so that you can see it with enough advancement that you can slow down or make a maneuver around it.
Are they taking into effect too? I know there's, I know you said that running during school hours. There are some, I know Mrs. Drexler had a son at one time during some of the, like I work at Grace Lutheran Child Care Center. I work up there as a 4K teacher. We get done at 11 o'clock. Those kids are getting done in the middle of the day. Is there gonna be a stipulation time period in between there where they may not run because?
I can't stipulate that. That would have to be something that you were to work out.
Right, that's all things that need to be considered in the application process. I said that's going to be the last question. It is 9:45. We have, a lot of the people have a lot of drive time, every place else to go. I myself personally like to thank the residents for coming out and listening. Definitely like to thank the experts here, everybody that showed up tonight. Very informational. All of the information, the presentation was taped tonight, so the committees can rewind and take a look at things. All of the information is being posted on the website. I'm going to get all of the presentations, the PowerPoints, everything. They'll be on the website. They'll be available also as much as possible for the next meeting, which is September 5th, 7 p.m. next Wednesday. Yes, next Wednesday. Yes, next Wednesday. Here again. So once again, thank you everyone for attending.